There we go. So a little background on me. I am a full stack JavaScript developer. I work for a small startup called Tuzag. I'm the only developer there at the moment. We have 3 employees total, so we're nice and small. I've been programming in JavaScript for about 10 years now. And went to the iSchool for 3 years, got a job offer, and decided to pursue that. And then about 2 years ago, there was a program called Start Fast Code. And I got to teach along Jeff, which I know you guys have had as an instructor, and just really fell in love with teaching then. That was also a 6-month program, and we had 2 or 3 cohorts go through that and kind of fell in love with teaching and found a resource called Free Code Camp, which we'll be diving into tonight. And so when Jesse approached me about careers in code, I jumped at the opportunity to teach again. So the biggest thing I can say tonight is interrupt me, ask questions. Nothing is worse than going through a whole class and getting lost in the first 2 minutes and getting the whole rest of it, but then getting stuck in the first 2 minutes. So totally interrupt me, ask questions. I think this is going to be a change of pace for you guys. We're going to try and slow it down a little bit. We're going to try and not cram just as much, especially into today. And part of the reasoning behind that is I want to gauge where you guys are at, and I want to make sure that you're keeping up with it. And 2, it just so happens that the curriculum has slowed down a little bit. So tonight we'll be covering objects and arrays, which are very fundamental to JavaScript and storing variables in them and stuff like that. I have an outline posted in the Google Classroom. I personally like outlines more than slides. I think they're easier to review, and you don't really need an instructor going through and reading everything off the slide. So I will do that with the outlines, but I just find they're easier to flip through and kind of review. First, I was hoping, and you guys are probably used to doing this now, but I'm hoping to learn everyone's names. So I was hoping to go around the room, say your name, and then maybe either a fun fact or something that you've enjoyed about the class or something you've been frustrated on in the class. Who wants to kick it off? Sure.
I'm Eva. I was very frustrated with the Syracuse.com project. I have pushed through. And JavaScript so far is okay. It's as far as I'm willing to go.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm Karen, and I think my biggest frustration is trying to balance work, home, and all of the coding that goes in with it.
Sure.
Eventually, I'll figure out something that works.
Okay.
My name's Joy, and I think like the most challenging thing so far has been that like JavaScript, like you can sort of do whatever you want, and the rules are kind of like loose, like it's meant to go, no matter what happens. So you can mess up and it'll just keep going. So even though I haven't been written a lot of JavaScript for it to do that to me,
Sure.
I'm a little worried that that's what's going on.
We will be getting that subject, covering that today with a tool that will help as you're writing the code, give you some feedback on what you're writing.
I'm Kate, and I've enjoyed the class so far. I think I'm getting everything pretty well. The one thing that I have not enjoyed is dreaming without coding.
Okay.
Generally, like it disrupts my sleep, but sometimes I wake up and I'm like, oh my god, why didn't I do that?
I have good news and bad news for you. The bad news is it doesn't stop. The good news is you tend to get more solutions as you dream about it and less of the nightmares of the infinite recursion and fun programming concepts.
My name is Tim, and so far, I think my biggest frustration was JavaScript.
Okay.
But I feel like I'm getting a better understanding of what it is and how it's supposed to be written.
Cool.
So I feel like I'll get it with more practice.
Cool.
My name is Dick Thompson. What I like about the class so far is that we get to meet so many different people who do this every day and learn from you guys. First in school, they've done it like a few years years back, and they don't really know what's correct. So it's nice to hear from people who just got out of work and
Sure.
doing.
Sure. Awesome.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I bought a paper copy of Eloquent JavaScript because I love this book, and
Okay.
I also just love paper books in general. I refuse to go fully digital, like having paper copies. My biggest frustration so far is definitely learning JavaScript.
Okay.
HTML looked like fun
Okay.
compared to this. I mean, it's not bad, it's not the worst thing
Sure.
I've ever done, but it is a lot to learn.
Yes.
And can be very frustrating.
Yes.
So, it's my biggest issue right now.
And that tends to be very common is people tend to like HTML and CSS a lot more or JavaScript a lot more. Me personally, I can't get out of HTML land fast enough. We had another developer working with us who just loved HTML and just was like, do I have to touch the JavaScript? So there are definitely both sides of it, and the good news is there are careers on both sides of it as well. So.
I'm Caitlin. I really like data,
Okay.
like a lot. So JavaScript has been difficult to follow along with, but like I'm getting the hang of it. And I'm like really excited to like use it.
Okay.
More to like manipulate data and like really look at data, kind of like dive into that.
Cool. You will like the class tonight because it's all about data structures.
Yay.
I'm Elizabeth, and I'm also grateful for having instructors that are doing it.
Yes. Awesome.
I didn't like HTML or any of that.
Okay.
JavaScript, I had to go back, like, okay, review binary, review hexadecimal, so I deep dove into that all weekend. God, it's a blast. I'm like, I remember that binary. So I went back.
Awesome.
But yeah,
Cool. Cool.
Get something, or get the foundation.
Sure. Sure.
My name is Anna, and one of my biggest frustrations was size.
Okay.
So I'm glad we're not using that anymore. We just stick to CSS.
Yes.
But so far, I do like JavaScript. I had a little bit of a hiccup last week because we're using Eternal and GitHub, and
Mhm.
it was a lot. So,
Yes.
but I know reviewing the material, and the reading does really help a lot. Just seeing everything and then going back and testing it in VS Code.
Yep. Awesome.
So, yeah, great. Love it.
So to talk a little bit about the structure, I'm sure it's similar to what other instructors have done. I personally am an outline guy. Like I said before, I'm not a huge fan of slides. I will try and get the outline posted a couple hours before class. I also have posted 4 days worth of pre-reading that you guys can do. A lot of it is eloquent JavaScript. There are a couple things outside of that as well. The point of the reading is not to come to class prepared, it's to come to class to not be confused. So just so when you hear the words again, it will kind of ring in your head. Not expecting you to read the eloquent JavaScript and just understand it all and just come to class and ready to code, right? So it's more just a precursor, just to get a little bit more comfortable with it. So the hardest part for me is going to be kind of jumping in and seeing where you guys are at. So if I say something and I'm way off base, feel free to jump in and be like, we have no idea what you're talking about. But we're going to start with objects and arrays. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Sure.
You said you're a full stack JavaScript developer.
Yes.
How is that? I thought HTML and CSS was a front end and then JavaScript was back end.
So JavaScript can be used on the front end and the back end. So languages like AngularJS and React are all written in JavaScript. Oh, did I just get audio feedback? Oh, okay. It's like, how did I manage to do that? So there are an exercise that we will probably do tomorrow night is identifying what a stack is. And what we'll do is brainstorm just names that you guys have heard. You know, Python, JavaScript, HTML, Ruby on Rails, just anything that you guys have heard of. And we're going to whiteboard it all out. And then we're going to identify what category that language or framework fits in. And then we're going to start putting puzzle pieces together. because you can be a full stack developer in HTML, CSS, and Python and SQL, and all those puzzle pieces fit together. Or you can be a full stack developer in Java Spring and Java and MongoDB, and all of those puzzle pieces can fit together. It depends where you're building, and so just start getting together a list of names, things that you have heard of, whether you know what they are or not, and we'll just throw it all out on the board, and then tomorrow we'll start puzzle piecing them together, and that will be kind of like our little intro warm-up exercise. Sound good? Awesome. Any other questions before I dive in? Awesome. All right. So I'm just going to read through this outline just because if you go the Google Classroom, if you scroll down to the end of Module 4.
Oh, fine. Okay.
Good?
Yeah, thank you.
So this is going to feel a little out of context. I'm going to go through this. We're going to get an account set up in Free Code Camp for everyone. Free Code Camp has their own code editor, so the intent is not to rip you guys away from Visual Studio Code, because that's definitely great. But you will find a lot of the familiarity with Visual Studio Code is also in Free Code Camp. So we're going to be writing the exercises right in there for now. And then we'll shift away from that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So arrays. You guys used variables last week, I know, in the card trick. Arrays are used to store multiple pieces of data. The big thing to remember with arrays is they start at 0. So when you go, oh, let me get the first item out of the array, you don't start at 1 like your brain does, you start at 0. Arrays are initialized with a const myArray. You would do equals and a square bracket. Square brackets are always denote an array in JavaScript. Arrays can have all different kinds of data in it, but for this example array, I just did an array of 3 different strings. In order to access a piece of data in the array, you would do myArray and then those square brackets and the 1. So if you did square bracket 1 on myArray, you would get green back. Arrays are stored in order, and that's a major reason to use arrays. If you're trying to keep a list of things and trying to retain what order those things are in, an array is going to be what you want to use. And there's some popular methods that I have listed out there. We're going to go through each one of them in the code, but basically those are the ways that you either add or remove data from the array. The main reason I list them out there is because they're easy to remember or easy to forget. Oh, does pop put in the beginning or the end? And so this is just kind of a quick reference place that you can go. Have you guys used MSDN yet? Okay. MSDN is kind of the go-to source for JavaScript information. It's essentially the documentation. I am mirroring displays. I did switch it though. Let me see if I switch scenes, does it come back? Sorry, streaming difficulties.
You're good. We'll get a break.
Okay. So that's arrays, and it can be a little confusing when you're getting started whether you should be using an array or an object. The main difference between an object and an array is arrays are ordered lists, right? So essentially think of them as a UL and as opposed to LI. No, a UL as opposed to OL. There we go. That's what I wanted. Told you I hate HTML. So objects, meanwhile, instead of using numbers as their indexes, instead objects use strings or just plain text, right? So let me scroll down here a little bit. This is an example object. So instead of using square braces, you use those curly braces, which happen to be on the same key on the keyboard. And so instead of accessing them by number, so instead of doing my car square bracket 1, instead you would do my car color, and that would give you the answer green.
So instead of calling for like index 0, you would call for color.
Exactly. Exactly. Properties are not always stored in order, and that's an important thing to remember, right? If you need order, you have to use an array. The kind of fun part, and you can see on that owners down at the bottom, is that in JavaScript, you can mix arrays and objects. So you can actually have an array of objects, or in the object, you can have arrays. And oftentimes when you get more and more advanced, especially when you start working with APIs, right, getting data from the internet and manipulating it, you'll find that things are often several levels deep. And so it's important to identify, all right, I'm looking at all my data. Now, what am I trying to access? And you go, okay, I'm trying to access the second owner in my car. So I'm going to do my car's owner's index 1, and that would return John in this example. But we're going to get more into that. We have a very fun JavaScript project called Record Collection, and it's essentially a jukebox, and you're supposed to update some information and tracks, and it can be very frustrating, so we're not going to do it just quite yet. But today we're just going over the basics of objects and arrays. Both arrays and objects can be manipulated. You can change the data in it. You can add keys. You can add values. And the important thing to remember is that they are comma separated, right? So you can't just do color value owners. There is a comma at the end of each one of the key value pairs. So I'm going to go over this stuff, and then if there's time, we're going to talk about indentation. It was very interesting teaching some of you guys at the office hours before and going over the different instructors and what indentation they were using. We're going to set you up with something called Prettier, which is going to do indentation for you. But the catch on this is indentation is still important for you to do on your own, right? So you don't want to just rely on this tool. However, the nice thing about Prettier is if you have a syntax error, right? If you are missing a semicolon or a comma somewhere, Prettier doesn't run. So you go, wait, why didn't that line indent? That looks wrong. And the more and more you program, the more and more you will learn to rely on your formatting, on your syntax. And all of a sudden you'll go, that doesn't look right. Why did that not indent? And it's because Prettier couldn't understand your code, so it couldn't format it. So we'll dive into that in a second. But right now, I'm going to jump into Free Code Camp. If everyone can go to freecodecamp.com. And someone please yell at me if I don't blow up the screen. You guys have used Free Code Camp? Awesome, ahead of the game. So I'm going to jump into the exercise, use an array to store a collection of data. If we go to the curriculum, it should be in the JavaScript and algorithm section. And I think it's actually, oh yeah, it is in basic data structures. So I'm glad you guys have been in Free Code Camp before. The nice thing about Free Code Camp is it's designed to go through without an instructor. So if you guys are like, I have no idea what the hell he's saying, you can just read through the instructions over here, and they're going to walk you through it. So the fundamentals of Free Code Camp is that they give you these tests over on the left, right? And as you guys go through this week, you're going to love green check marks and you're really going to hate the X's, because there are times that you'll spend an hour on one of these projects and finally get a green check mark, and it's your last one to get, and you get it, and everything else turns into an X. And you're like, there goes all my progress. I can't believe I just lost all of that. However, it is the nice thing about Free Code Camp is it continues to build on itself. And so you'll get more and more challenging. But let's play around with some arrays here. So what they want us to do over here is they want your array to be an array. They want it to have 5 elements in it, and they want one to be a Boolean, right, a true false value, one to be a number, and one to be a string. So let's go ahead and get started there. So I'm going to put my cursor right after this let your array, and I'm going to put a space after it and do equals and another space, and then I'm going to do my square brackets. Now, everyone programs a little differently, but the way I code is whenever I open a bracket, I close my bracket immediately. And then I go ahead and I put my cursor back in there, and now I know if I forget to come back, that array is running, right? So what we can do is we just made an array. There's nothing in the array, but it's an array nonetheless. So if we go ahead and hit run tests here, you'll see we get a green check mark on your array, and all of these are not done yet.
Stop it and start again, sorry.
Okay, so let's put some things in our array. I like going in order, so it needs a Boolean. So let's say true, and let's do false while we're at it. It needs a number, so we'll say 5, and it needs a string. So the important thing to remember is arrays just hold other data types. So you can use whatever data type you would do in a const or a let somewhere else, you can also do in the array. Thank you. Maybe it's on a little delay. Can you refresh the page? Because I'm streaming on here.
Yeah, it'll take a second to get back up.
Okay.
Run this live there then.
Okay. So we'll do a string because it's my first day teaching. We'll do a hello world just because I think the programming gods would spite me if I didn't. And let's get a little fancy here. Oh, let's not get fancy yet. I changed my mind. Let's do. All right, so we'll go ahead and run them. Big green check marks. We celebrate big green check marks. And I'm going to go on tangents here, but one thing that I've learned in programming is it's very important to set an objective, and it's an objective that you can reach, right? So it's so easy to be doing the Netflix project and go, all right, I want my row to look like that. It's like, no, that's not an objective. Too big, right? You have an H1 there. You have to get all the images spaced out properly. You want the aspect ratios right. All of those individual things, those are the objectives. And the reason why it's important to set an objective is because it's so easy to go, oh, well, you know what? I'm working on the row, but it's going to be super easy to throw in a little padding here. And then you go down and work on the padding, and then you go, oh, well, maybe that should be margin. And then you get the margin right. And then you go back to the layout, and you're like, wait, what was I doing on the layout, right? So it's super important to set your objective, but also when you hit your objective, take a break. You did it. That's something to celebrate, right? It's not just all right, great, what's the next thing? It's important to take a step and go, hey, we got a big green check mark. That means I finished 5 objectives. I just made my first array. That's something to celebrate. Okay. So now we get a little bit more complicated. So my array 0 is supposed to be equal to A. My array index 1 is no longer supposed to be set to B. So you guys can read that stuff. So let's write some code here. So my array 0 is equal to A. I think it already is, but I'm not sure. Computer's not going to bite me or yell at me if I run my code, right? So I'm going to run the tests. And would you look at that? We already have my array is equal to A, and we already have the second and third test cases running. Or the third and fourth. See, I'm already 0 indexing arrays. So all we need to do is say my array sub1 is equal to, let's make it no longer B. And if we run the tests, that's it. By the way, I'll be posting all of my code samples here. They won't vary too much from what the accepted answer is. In programming, it isn't really about the right answer, right? It's about the answer that runs. I've gone through this free code camp curriculum 5 times now with different classes, and I am still finding answers to some of the more advanced problems where I'm like, I would never have thought to write it that way, but you know what, it works. So it's not necessarily about the fewest lines of code. It's about making sure that you understand what's running. And everyone can come up with different solutions. On the intro stuff, maybe not so much. But don't feel that because you did it a different way than the way I did it, that your way is wrong. Okay, so what do they want down here? Now we're getting into some fun stuff. Okay, mixed numbers. So they have a function, and you guys have seen functions before, right? Yeah, okay. So what they're doing is they have this console log here, and they're calling mixed numbers. So the computer goes, all right, what's mixed numbers? Mixed numbers is defined up here, and they pass in this parameter, right? This parameter is ARR. So this ARR is going to be whatever is in these two parentheses. So ARR is now equal to IV, 5, and 6. So we go up here. We're not doing anything in this function yet except returning ARR. ARR is equal to this IV, 5, and 6 still. So this whole block of code here is now equal to IV, 5, and 6, and then we're going to console log it. And that's what we're seeing down here. And so we can change this just to 6, and all of a sudden we see in our console that changed. Okay. I do find it is helpful sometimes to actually print out my code, especially when I'm getting started, because it's easy to get lost in functions. And so there are times where I'm like, I don't know where this is going. Like, this is jumping over so many places. I will actually print it out and draw arrows and go, all right, I'm going to draw an arrow from mixed numbers up to mixed numbers. And I'm going to draw an arrow and circle this array and draw it up to ARR. And then I'm going to draw a line from ARR down to ARR here. And then I'm going to draw a line from the return back to a giant circle around all of this. And sometimes that will help with the flow. It seems really simple on something this small, but it does get complicated. Any questions so far? Cool. All right, so mixed numbers IV 5, 6 should now return I, 2, 3, IV 5, 6, 7. Okay. The mixed numbers function should utilize the push method, and the mixed numbers function should utilize the unshift, right? So there are 2 places we can go. There are 3 places we can go to figure that out. What's push and unshift? Now, they explained push and unshift up here. Push adds elements to the end of the array, and unshift adds elements to the beginning of the array. Resource 1. Resource 2, in my outline, I also have push and unshift, right? So that's resource 2. Resource 3 is a website that when you guys become professional developers, will be living on. And that is MDN. So if we do a search for JavaScript, let's just pretend that we knew to look up the method push. We're going to look up push. W3 Schools is a fine resource. I find Mozilla is a better place to go. MDN stands for Mozilla Developer Network. And so what this is going to do is it's going to show us what happens. So they set something up, an array called animals. They push cows into it, and we see cows is at the end of it. And then they push chickens, and we're good to go. MDN will also show you the syntax that you can push in multiple elements, and it will tell you what it returns. The 4th resource that I'm now adding to the list is what if we didn't know what it was called? We're like, we know there's some method out there. I can't keep this all in my head. So we're going to do a search for JavaScript, add element to array. And, Ooh, I'm surprised. Stack Overflow is normally the first answer. Stack Overflow is a network of developers. And so here is someone that has asked this question and it's gotten upvoted almost 2,900 times. And the answer is use push function to append an item to an array. And they give you a little code sample. And this writer was even nice enough to give us a little link. We click on the link. Look where we end up, MDN. So this sounds really simple, but over the course of just this boot camp alone, you're going to learn probably close to 100 functions, if not more. And I don't remember what push returns. I use it every day, and I don't remember what it does. So I scroll down here and see, oh, it's what it does, the syntax for it, all of that kind of stuff. So we're going to go back to Free Code Camp now that I've jabbered on enough. And so what do they want us to do here? They want us to add 1, 2, and 3 to the beginning of the array, and 7, 8, and 9 in different variables. So we're going to go arr.push, and we're going to add I. Oh, and we're not going to hit save because that's an instinctual thing for me to do. All right. Now we could keep going, but let's just make sure this is working. Let's hit run tests, and we can see that it's now returning the I, 2, 3, IV, 5, 6. Oh, I'm sorry, that's what it should be returning. Why is it not console logging? So let's go to inspect element and see if it's in there. I don't want to go in there. Why did that not console log? Let's try and console log up here. Okay. It was there for a minute. Okay. So, sometimes you want to put in console logs. Console logs are going to help you as you're coding. And we see IV 5, 6, I. Well, that's not what we want, right? We want the one at the beginning of the array. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here and we're going to say unshift. And all of a sudden, I is popped into the beginning of the array. So unshift is kind of a cool parameter, kind of a cool function. It takes multiple parameters. So what we can do is we can just do a comma and then 2 and 3. Okay, and we can see in our console log, it's doing what we want. That's awesome. So we're going to keep this party going, and we're going to push. And we're going to push 7 and VII. And don't forget our spaces and our semicolons. And you notice I could do one more there, but just to give you guys an example of it not necessarily having to be this particular answer, you could also push again on a new line of code and push 9 in there. And if we run these tests, we got our green check mark. Awesome. Take a minute. We accomplished our goal. But we can also go back in and play now, right? All right, we have one solution, but let's make sure we really understand this. We could also put the 9 up here. And because we're in JavaScript, let's just comment this line out. And we can run the tests, and we get a green check mark again. So it's not about necessarily what the super correct answer is. I can give you 3 arguments on why this code is better. I can give you 3 arguments on why it would be better to put it on separate lines. But at the end of the day, it's what makes sense to you guys. Cool. All right. On to the next one. Okay, so now we put some things in. Let's pop and shift some things out. So let's scroll down here. And they want challenge is not complete to return challenge complete. So they want us to use both pop and shift. All right, so let's scroll up here. Let's see what they tell us to do. If we run pop, it's going to take something off the end of the array. And if we run shift, it takes it off the beginning, right? So this is kind of interesting. They want us to remove is and not, but they want us to leave challenge and complete. Who has an idea on how to do that?
Pop off and shift just the two and make them into like a new variable.
Sure, we could do that. So they want us to change just these lines. Single element at a time. Okay, so if we read the instructions a little bit more, it will tell you that pop returns the item that it removed. So not only if we pop right now, well, let's actually do it. Let's say popped equals ARR dot pop. And now if we look at what's being returned here, complete is being returned. And so let's go to shifted and do our ARR dot shifted. Shift, I'm sorry. And so we have challenge and complete. So what they did here is they popped the first item out. So so we have some more clarity into this code, let's console log out the array. And what we see is when we popped it the first time, this popped value, well, let's console log both of them so we can see it. We're going to just comment that out for now. Okay, so our first console log was ARR. And right after we run pop, the value of ARR is challenge, is, and not, right? So it removed that last word from the array. But pop returned a value as well. So in addition to it modifying the first array that we told it to work on, it also sent back to this popped variable what it removed from the array. So we can see that, and it's important to console log sometimes, right? So the console log of ARR showed us challenge, is, and not. And it shows us that it did actually remove that last element. And now let's console log popped, and we see that complete is actually an array, right? And complete's the only thing in the, oh, I'm sorry, it's not an array. Popped returns the value that it removed, so complete is just a string. So what it did is it put out complete for us, and now we can see that. So we repeat the process again, and shifted is now equal to challenge. So what we did is we put those two elements into a new array, shifted and popped, which are equal to challenge and complete, and then we return that value. Questions? Okay. On to the next one. So let's see. So they have this new function for us. They call it sum of 10, and they have all of these items in the array. And what they're saying is that sum of 10 should return 10 and should use splice. So what we just did is a pretty common thing, right? Sometimes you want to remove things in the middle of the array without having to take all the things out one by one or figure it out if it's at the beginning or end. So what splice does is the first parameter, if we scroll up enough, represents where it should start. So what index do we want to remove? And then the second parameter says how many of them do you want to remove? So they want this to equal 10. So what we can do is we can splice obviously a couple different places in this array to get its equal 10. But let's get started. We'll do arr.splice. And I'm just going to say I only want this 5 and this 5 left in the array, and I don't want anything else. So I'm going to say, hey, splice this out. And because it's a 0 index, I'm going to say start at 0 and then delete one of them. And you can, this is just documentation. This isn't some just annoying box, by the way. You can actually use this and go, oh, okay, where do I want it to start splicing and how many of them do I want it to take out? So instead of keeping on going, I'm going to console log out my array here, and I'm going to see that I have 5, 1, 5, 2, and 1. So it did take out that initial 2. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to arr.splice again, and now keep in mind that we modified the original array. So this is now 0 instead of it being 1. So I'm going to say I don't want to splice out 0, the first number. I want to splice out now what is the second number in the array or the first index. And I'm going to splice out one number again. And now we have 5, 5, 2, 1. So we're going to keep going. And now we're going to splice out the second index, and we're going to splice out 2 of them. We're going to delete 2 of those numbers. And so when we run, we get our check mark. So sometimes I find it's helpful to move this console log around and say, okay, now this is 5, 1, 5, 2, 1. So what I'll do is I'll do a comment here, and I'll say that when this line runs, it's equal to that array, right? So I leave myself a couple notes. And maybe I will console log out the array up here and see what the array is coming in as. And I'll say array starts as, oops. Right, now we already got the green check mark. We could move on, but now that we're leaving ourselves notes, when you guys go back to the challenge when you're trying to work on record collection, we can see what the values are evaluating out to, right? So let's just finish off because this is a good practice. Now my indentation's not right and it's driving me crazy, so we want to get that looking right. Now we're going to put our console log down here, and it's going to output 5, 5, 2, and 1. And we'll move our console log one more time. And we have equal to 5 and 5. Now, Free Code Camp does all kinds of fun stuff. Like they're using this reduce function. But what we want to pay attention to is they're pretty good about saying, hey, change between this line and this line. Reduce we cover later, but they just want to have something that they can run through and make sure that the tests are working on their end. So they try and not put too much under the hood for you or hide things from you. But you can be assured that we will be covering reduce down the road. Any questions on this so far? Yes.
So we did this place on 3 lines.
Yes.
Is it possible to do it in 1, or is it because the numbers are so spaced out we need to do it multiple times?
So you could do it all on one line, and you can do it all on one line a couple different ways. So splice only takes 2 parameters. It only takes the start and how many you're deleting. So you couldn't chain them like we did in push, where we kept on adding in the things. However, you could chain the methods themselves. So if you wanted to, you could actually take this dot splice and put it up here all on one line. And so we're just going to remove that for now. And if we run these tests, that didn't work. So let's look into why. So let's look up splice on MDN. So we'll do a search for JS splice. And we'll go to our second link. And when we scroll down here, we're looking for the return value, right? And the return value says it returns an array containing the deleted elements. So if we look at what's happening in our code, if we try and do it this way, array is starting out, oh, come on. Array is starting out where we want it to, and then splice 0, 1 is working on this array the way we want it to, and it's taking out that first element. So now ARR is equal to 51521. But this whole thing before our next period is now equal to 2. And so now we're saying, okay, now splice out the first index in the array of 2. JavaScript is like, oh, that's not what we want. So sometimes you can chain the methods like this depending on what the function is returning. Yes?
So it's not saying take a specific element, it's just saying, hey, find this number.
It's not find the number or the value, it's find the index. Find the first value or the second value. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're doing here, right, is like we wanted to splice out, I'm going to put the code back to the way it was. We don't want to splice out the number 0 or the number 1. It's important to know what these parameters are, right? So if we click in here and type something, no, it's not going to do what I want it to. What we're doing here is we're saying, hey, where do you want to start deleting and how many do you want to delete? So the array 251521, we want to start at the 0 index, right? The first number in the array, and we want to delete out one of them. And so when we do that, the new array, because the splice is modifying the thing that we're running it on, the new array has removed that. So now on this one, the reason why it's 1, 1 is because this is the new value of array. So we don't want to remove this 5. We only want to remove this 1. So we say, hey, start at the first index instead and remove one number again. So now that 1 comes out, and we see that, right? The 1 is now gone on the next line, and we only have the 2 and the 1 remaining. So now we say, hey, start on the second index. And it's not the second index of the array that we started on. It's the second index of the most recent value of array. And we're going to start on the second index, so 0, 1, 2. And this would obviously be 3. So go to the second index, and now instead of removing just this 2, we're going to delete 2 numbers out. So we're going to remove the 2 and the 1. So we could, if we wanted to, just go in here and say, hey, just remove one number. And now we're going to get this, and we're going to arr.splice, again, the second index, and only delete one number. And when we run those, we still get the answer. Now, if we wanted to, we can get a little crazy, and we just learned about unshift, right? We could also remove, see, like I forgot already. What does unshift do? JS unshift. It shift adds, unshift removes, right?
Oh.
So what we could do, yeah, that,
Yeah.
okay. So let's find out, right? Let's go here and we're going to put this back to 2 and 2. And let's try and remove the first array with arr.unshift. And if we run that, we did not get it to pass. So let's find out what that did. Let's console log arr. And so what unshift did is this is what we passed in, 251521. And it did nothing. So let's find out why. Let's go back to unshift. So unshift method adds one or more elements to the beginning of the array. So that's not quite what we want. So now we're getting confused, but we just completed those lessons. So what we can do is go back up to the curriculum and scroll through, and we say, oh, this is what the lesson we just did that in. So when we click in there, we can see the pop and shift method. We can read through this documentation again, and we can go, oh, that's right. We want pop and shift, not unshift. So you were right. Yeah.
Okay, so moving, instead of using, I was thinking of like putting in pop -1 to move it from the last position to the first position.
Yes,
Okay.
that's exactly right. So what we can do here is we can shift instead, and now when we run that, we pass again, right? Because we took out the first number. And so if we come down here, instead of deleting 2 numbers from the end of the array, this 2 and the 1, we could just decide to delete one of the numbers with a splice and instead do an array.pop. And when we run that, we pass again. Or if we wanted to, we could get fancy and delete this splice altogether and pop 2 times in a row. And when we run that, that also runs. So lots of different answers. The test won't pass unless you use splice, because the whole point of it is that they want you to learn something on this. There have been times that I've seen students go, oh, I couldn't get it to work, so I wrote out 90 lines, and it's just pop, 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 pop. And I'm like, splice takes a second parameter, right? And they're like, oops, and delete it all out and put in one line, and it runs great. But there are lots of acceptable answers here. Good? Cool. Okay, so now we're going to get fancy. If we can remove specific indexes, we can also add at specific indexes. So they want HTML color names to equal this by the time we're done with it, right? And they're saying we should use splice, and they're saying they don't want us to use shift or unshift, because we can get clever, right? And we can remove things or put them back in at the beginning or the end of the array. But they're like, no cheating. We want you to learn how to use splice. So we'll go use splice. So we're going to go up here, and we're going to read what splice does. Oh, I'm sorry. They don't want us to remove it. They want us to, oh yeah, they do want us to add using splice. So what we'll do is they have a little code example here, right? So they say index 1 and new color is going to add that in. So what we're going to do is we have dark goldenrod, white smoke, lavender blush, pale, and fire brick. And they want dark salmon, blanched almond, lavender bush, blush. Okay, so let's get started here. So they want dark goldenrod isn't what they want at all, right? So we're going to splice out the first index, and we're going to delete one thing out of it. And what I believe they are saying is that we can also add a new color instead in its place. So let's just see what happens if we do a third parameter here and we put in dark salmon instead. So now when we look at our array, we have dark salmon, which is what we want as our first index, and then white smoke. We don't want white smoke. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, instead of just deleting the first value, instead of just deleting dark goldenrod, let's delete 2 values instead. And now we have dark salmon, which is what we want, and we still have lavender blush. So what happens if we add another thing in here? I'm not sure if we can do this. Blanched almond. It did work. All right. Then computer's not going to yell at you. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? We take it out, we try something else. Okay, so then we have our lavender blush, we have our pale turquoise, and we have our fire brick. So we run it. Good to go. Now, if that hadn't worked, what I would have done is I would have changed this back to 1, and I would have taken this out, and I would have said, all right, I want to practice using splice. I'm going to splice, and what do I want to splice out? I want to splice out, we have our dark Simon, I want to splice out the first index, right, that white smoke, and I want to delete just that one element, and then I want to put in blanched almond. All right, and that worked as well. And that's a great catch, is capitalization and spaces matter, right? So
I'm about to slam my head for the 10th time.
that totally happens.
Slamming heads.
I've spent the past month getting a 14-page PDF to generate with all different kinds of algorithms, and there are times that I can't tell you how many times I've misspelled activity. There are so many I's in activity, and I want to do ACIT, and I'm like, oh my God, and I'm looking at it. This code should be working. I know this code should be working, and it's because I spell activity wrong, right? So it's important. If I put a space in here, oh, they allowed for that. If I delete a D in here, all of a sudden I fail the test, right? So it's important to make sure that you have it letter for letter. Okay. We're going to go to the next one. And we're going to see how many more array ones we have to do. 2, 3, 4. Okay, we have 4 more challenges to do. And then we'll take a break. And when we come back, we'll do objects. Sound good? Mm-hmm. All right. All right, so now they want us to copy an array. And they want us to use slice. Notice there's no P in that. We're not using splice, we're using slice. Okay, so rather than modifying the array that you're calling it on, it copies or takes it out of the array. Now, slice only takes 2 parameters, where we want to begin the extraction and the index that we want to stop at. And they have an important note here. Include up to, but not including that index, right? So let's scroll down here. So while they give us all of these cold, rainy, warm, sunny, cool thunderstorms, and they want us to return warm and sunny, right? So we're going to ARR dot slice, and we're going to slice. Where do we want to slice? Well, this is 0 and this is 1, so this must be 2. And then we also want to go, and this is where this is helpful. It says the up to but not including the index at the end. So let's get that to go away. And so we want 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's try that. Let's run those tests. And that didn't work. All right, so let's find out why not. Let's console log what that is. So when we console log it, right, this bottom line is this console log here. So this top line is warm and sunny. Well, it wants warm and sunny. Well, why didn't that work? We're console logging it. We're seeing that it's warm and sunny. Something's not right here. All right, so let's go to the documentation. JS slice. And one important note here is that you want to make sure you get the right slice, because there's also a slice on strings, but we're not working with strings right now, right? We're working with the array. So let's go into that one, and we'll scroll down to the return, and the return value is a new array containing the extracted elements. So when we go back to our code, well, it's returning to this big console log, warm and sunny. And then it's like, all right, I'm done with you, return the array. Slice does not modify the original array. So we have a couple ways of fixing this. We can either say array, is now equal to what we're outputting from this slice. And so when we run that, we get our green check mark. The other thing we can do is it's kind of silly to set array equal to this thing and then just return it. So we can just delete that line out and just say, hey, return that slice.
I have that, but it's not working.
Okay, let's take a look. Array slice 2, 4, and run the test again. So if you scroll down, the forecast should use the slice method. Try and delete that parenthesis out. Or I'm sorry, the space after the before the parenthesis. So what was happening there was the JavaScript was running. The JavaScript didn't care about the space, but Free Code Camp really wanted to see that in particular. Everyone following along? We're good? All right, let's power through. Okay, now we're going to get fancy. Have you guys dived into ES5 versus ES6 yet? I think that's upcoming, right? Okay. So what we're going to do is they're saying that we can actually copy an array. So basically we can put in these 3 dots, and this is a relatively new feature in JavaScript. But here at Careers in Code, we always teach the latest and the greatest. So we are using the spread operator. I believe Joey's going to dive in what ES5 versus ES6 is, or ES 2015 they call it sometimes, which is just basically these versions of JavaScript. But we're going to go over the spread operator. What the spread operator does is it lets us copy the array. So they initialize this array, they set the values of this array. Then we make a new variable called that array, and we kind of copy in this array. Have you guys gone over reference versus assignment yet, or reference variables? A little bit? Okay. So basically what's happening is what you might, well, let's get this working and then I'll dive back into it. So an array and a number, it's supposed to return a new array made up of a number of copies of ARR. All right, so true, false, true, 2 should return true, false, true. Interesting. Okay. Now we haven't done loops. Have you guys done if statements yet? Okay, so we'll do it with if statements. Like, well, oh, I'm sorry, they already have the loop written. Never mind. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to put in here new ARR, and basically this while loop we are actually going to be covering tomorrow, different kinds of loops, how to get your code to run over and over again. But basically what this is saying is while there's still numbers to go through, execute some code in here. So we'll go into the details of the loop later, but what we're going to do is we're going to say new ARR is equal to an array and an array of the array that they're passing in. And we're going to get 3 dots instead of 2. And that's an important note. When you're writing, even in Visual Studio Code, you see that little red squiggly? That ain't spell check, right? That's telling you something's wrong with your code. JavaScript doesn't know what 2 periods are, but it knows what 3 is. So let's go ahead and run this. And what it did is when we passed in true, false, true, it should return true, false, true, true, false, true. Okay, so let's console log out what it did do. And when it ran, both this time and this time, it only returned true, false, true. Because what we did is we just copied the array that already exists into a new variable. So we just copied it and copied it. We didn't do anything new with it. So let's do the array that they're passing in, and let's also do the current value of that array. and get 3 periods. And so now we have true, false, true, true, false, true. It's repeating itself. So let's try and run that. Okay. And now what it says is what it wants is the array, right? Notice this is a nested array. We have 2 curly braces here. So it actually wants true, false, true, true, false, true in 2 separate arrays. And what we are passing in, if we go back and edit a line of code here, we'll see we're passing it all in as one giant array. That's what's coming out. So we're going to take out these spread operators, and we're going to run it, and we're still not going to get anything. Let's see. New array. So we're passing in the array, and we are taking the current value of the array and adding it in, and we're still getting that output. So that's not what we want either. All right, what if, darn, they want the spread operator. So I'm stuck, right? I'm like, all right, where do we go from here? This is a little bit of a challenge. Yeah, so we're gonna play around a little bit, right? I'm like, wait, we already know about push, right? We already know that we can add things into an array. So what if we do new arr.push and we push in the array? Okay. We were so close, right? But Free Code Camp knows we're cheating. So it said, yeah, you got it. You did it. It took it out. It all worked. And we get to the very bottom. It goes, hey, where's your spread operator, you little cheater? But we know we got close, right? Because we knew it did what we wanted. And on a coding interview, this would be completely acceptable. But it wants us to learn this spread operator. So what I'm curious about is when we change something here just to see what our console logs are. This console's doing us a little bit of an injustice. So what I want to see is where the arrays are, and the console's kind of cheating us and removing those square brackets, so we don't really know what's coming out. So if I open the actual console in the browser, we're going to see a lot of stuff under the hood, which we don't want to dive too deep into. What's actually happening is all those check marks that it's running over on the side, it's outputting to the console. So we have a lot more output in the console here than we're expecting, right? We're expecting it just to run the code that's in there. But when we open this up, we can actually see what's coming out, and we can see that it's the arrays that we want. And we can see that the first array has an index of 0, and that index of 0 is an array itself. So that's good to know that we can't always rely on this console in here because it's not showing us the data structure of the data that it's outputting. So we're going to clear that, and we're going to figure out how to do this with a spread operator. So we are going to say, we're going to think this through, right? And we're going to go, all right, copy machine true, false, true should return true, false, true, true, false, true. Now, this while loop, the number coming in is 2, and 2 is greater than 1, so go ahead and execute some code. So we're going to say our new array is going to equal new array, and it's also going to, again, equal the array that's coming in. And when we look at our console, I'm going to scroll up to tough to see what code is executing. And of course, it's only going to let me see the last one that ran. Okay, so what it did is for this one in particular, it returned in the first index of the array an empty array, an array with 0 items in it. And then it returned in the next one an array with 3 items in it. So let's put our spread operator in here. So what we're saying is, hey, take whatever the current value is of new array and essentially expand it out there. So instead of it being empty array, instead it's going to expand out and put the values in that array into this value. And there's nothing in there, so it won't do anything. But now the next time it will put in the values of ARR. Little tricky to explain without console logging, but let's run this. So they're saying it needs to be used with ARR. So let's do it on both, which I thought I had done earlier. Sometimes it's just trial and error because we know we're close. All right, well, maybe it's time for a break, and when we get back, I'll have an answer for you guys. This is proof as someone who works with arrays all day long even gets stumped. So when you guys come back, I won't just have an answer for you guys, I'll have an answer of how I figured it out. We'll take a 10-minute break and be back at like 7:05, 10, 15 minutes. All right, we're gonna get started here, and one of the reasons I was thinking about how to prep for the course, right? And I'm like, all right, I know these are the 10 exercises that I want to go through, and I thought, should I do them now? And I went, no, there's a benefit to me not doing them in advance, so you guys can see as a professional developer, I get stuck on these things. And so I did get it, and there are a couple different solutions to it. I love Free Code Camp. I don't like this Free Code Camp problem, and it's not because I got stuck on it. It's because I think what they're teaching, they kind of like forced you into something that isn't good programming. And so that's a little tough. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go to a whiteboard because I have a whiteboard by my desk and I constantly cannot find space on it, and it's huge. I'm always using my whiteboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write out the code. So what they pass in is true, false, true. And by the way, I'll take a picture of this and post it in the classroom, so because I know it won't be part of the stream. And they're saying that what should come out is true, false, true. And then another array of the same thing, right? We're copying it. Okay, so we have our array, and we're going through this, and let's just ignore the loop for this time. So what's happening is the code that I had before was new array. First of all, the new array is empty, right? So we have an empty array here. And what we want to do is we have our loop, and our loop is handling the number of times it needs to repeat. Great. So what do we want to be at the end of this, right? We want our new array to look like this. And this loop is going to run, if we look at the number being passed in, twice. So the first time, what's the expected output? What do we want in new array? We want what is getting passed in and nothing else, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to say new array is equal to, and if we just say the array that's getting passed in, right, the input array. Now let's go through this. Let's see what happens. So we run through it the first time, and new array is now going to be equal to true, false, true. All right, that's the first time. Now we go through it the second time, and it's going to overwrite whatever was in new array because we're saying, hey, now it's equal to the array that's getting passed in. So it's going to return just true, false, true. That's not what we want, right? We want to get these two arrays together. So what we do is we say, hey, set new array equal to a new array, right? Ignore the value that's in it for now. But now we're going to write in new array into this array that we're assigning new array to, and we're going to also put in the array. But what would happen is the first time this runs, it's going to output, the first time it runs, new array is empty. But because we're telling it, it's going to output an empty array and then the true, false, true. That's not what we want. We don't want this to be an empty array. So what we do is we do a spread operator. And what that spread operator is going to do is it's going to say, instead of taking this array and dumping it in here, take whatever the values of this array are and dump them in here. So this is going to new array, the first time it runs, is just going to be equal to this is going to be empty. There's not going to be anything there. and then it's going to push in the array of true, false, true. Right? So this ends up just being empty, and it's just the first item in it. Now, if we change this and put dot, dot, dot here, what it's going to equal out to is true, false, true in the array. Right? So basically those three dots are the spread operator. You're saying, hey, take whatever's in array and spread it out, as opposed to, hey, take that array and just dump it in with the brackets. So what happened here is that I had the code set up like this. And I ran it, and I got all my check marks, and it says the copy machine function should use the spread operator with the array ARR. And I went, but I don't need the spread operator on ARR. I need the spread operator on new array, right? Because I want to take in whatever the value is of the current array and keep it in there, and then add in the array. And it said, no, we don't like that. And so what we did before is we pushed it in there, and we got the same result. And I was like, well, I can just push it. Why are you teaching this? And the spread operator is super useful, and it's a good thing to learn. But what they basically said is what they wanted was take array, which is already an array of true, false, true, right? The array is already equal to this. And instead, take true, false, true, and essentially remove those square braces around it. Take all the values of the array as opposed to the array itself, and spread it all out. But then what we get is this. And we don't want this. We still want the original brackets. So what they say to do is put it back in brackets. And when we run that, we get the answer. So the reason I don't like this challenge is because this code produces the exact same output that this code does. This code is much cleaner. So that's why I would write it this way. And that's why I kept on going, why am I not passing this? This should be working. It's because they want you to really use the spread operator. And so they want you to understand that instead of, the whole point of the spread operator is instead of it putting in the whole array with the brackets, it's taking each individual value that's already in that array and putting it in there. And so basically what they're saying is, yes, we do want you to add in the array, but what you can do is just spread out the array yourself. And then you run and you get the green check mark. I'll post an article on the spread operator because I feel like I'm not doing the best job describing it right now. The spread operator, it's all about taking the values inside the array instead of thinking of the array as one variable. And when you do the spread operator, it takes each individual one and dumps it out into there. But I will post an article with the spread operator because I think a graphic will help show what it's spreading out, so to speak. But I'll also post a picture of that if it will help. So for now, we're going to move on. I believe we are close to the end of arrays, and then I'm going to stop at 8 o'clock, and we'll do either a pair program or you can work on a couple of these assignments yourself, just in case you get stuck, and that way you can write the code and have some fun with syntax. Sound good? Cool. All right, so we get more practice with the spread operator, which is good. It says spread out should return learning to code is fun, and it should utilize the spread syntax. And what they have is to and code. And they want us to return the sentence, which, so what we're going to do is we are going to say let sentence equal to, and I think this will help with the spread operator to wrap your guys' head around it. We're going to say learning, and then we're going to say fragment. And what we want to do here is we want the final value to be one big array. We don't want it to be a string, an array with two strings in it, and then the rest of the sentence. We just want it to be one big array. So if we do learning and the fragment, and then say is and fun, and we run it, we pass. So if we look at the array that's coming out in our console, we have exactly what we want, right? Everything is its own individual value. Now, if we take out that spread value, that spread operator, and just put the fragment in, but not the spread out fragment, what we get here is learning, an array with two items in it, and is fun. And so if we open that up, we can see that second item in the array is two code. It has the brackets around it still. That's not what we want. We want one big array, right? So basically what we're doing is saying, hey, take whatever's in that fragment and spread it out in the new array that we're creating. And we do that with the 3 dots. Does that help a little bit? Okay. Sometimes you just have to have faith in Free Code Camp and keep going, and that will probably cover it more in the next exercise. Have you guys talked about open source software at all? Okay. So open source software is free software that the community supports. And I created a project 6 months ago, and it was a little time tracker for project management. And I had random person reach out to me on Twitter and said, hey, I found your project on GitHub. Can I use it? It's like, yeah, sure. Like, I wrote the code. I don't care. And so he goes, all right, how do I set it up? And so now we're going back and forth on Twitter, a complete stranger, and he's using the code that I used because it was helpful for me. So the cool thing about Free Code Camp is it's all open source. So this curriculum is constantly evolving. And if you go back onto this in 6 months, you'll find that there might be a couple more lessons, or the lessons might be in a different order. And it's because students are going through it and going, hey, I went through the whole curriculum and I got really confused on the first spread operator. If we just swap these two, I'll probably understand spread better, and so will future students. And that's totally something you can do, which is awesome. All right. Now they want some money. Okay. So I believe this is the last thing we're going to do. And what they want is they want to know whether mushrooms is in this array of squash, onions, and shallots. And then you keep going. Some should return true, some should return false. So in here, we're going to use index of. So what we're going to do is we're going to say return, right? We want our function to return something. And we want to say, hey, look in the array and let me know the index of this element. So if we run the test, or if we just look at actually what's being returned there, it's -1. So what happened is when it looked for it looked for mushrooms in squash, onions, and shallots, it didn't find it. So if it doesn't find it, it returns -1. So if we change this to shallots, we're going to get 2 back because it's 0, 1, 2. It's the second index that it found it in. So there are a couple ways we can do this. What it wants is false or true. It doesn't want the index of it. It just wants to know if it's in there or not. So what we can do is we can say if the array has the index of the element is equal to -1, triple equals, then return false. Else, return true. And we're going to take that out, and we're going to run it. And we got it. So this works. we're great. It's a little verbose. So basically what we're saying here is if it's equal to -1, return false, else return true. This makes sense. It's easy to read, but we can do it all on a single line of code. So we're going to comment this out, and we're going to say return whether the array has an index of the element is not equal to -1. And we're going to run that, and we're going to also get it. And the reasoning behind that is what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, if the index of element 1 is equal to, if the index of the element in the array is equal to -1, return false, else return true. So we just swapped those two. What we basically did was this. We said return true, return false, and made it not equal. And if we run that, that will also run. So what happens here is the computer evaluates this out. And it goes, okay, index of this array, look for this element, this is equal to -1. Now we do a comparison operator. And we say, okay, is -1 not equal to -1? -1 is equal to -1, so we return false. But everything in these parentheses gets evaluated down to false. So under the hood, what the computer is doing is it's figuring out what this value is, and then it's comparing this value to this value, and it's going, okay, this whole thing evaluates out to false. So we go down to the else. So because this whole thing evaluates out as false, we can just return false. That a little too deep? Might help to whiteboard it. Keep going.
I just don't get the return statement at the bottom. How does that translate to that?
Yeah, so let's go through that. So we have if array index of element is not equal to -1, and then we have our return true, else return false. So sometimes it's helpful to go through it the way the computer will go through it. So the first thing the computer will do is it's going to replace any variables with the actual values. So for this first one, it's looking for mushrooms. So element becomes mushrooms. And array becomes our shallots and our onions and our squash. Right? So now it has the variables evaluated in. So now it goes, okay, does this array have mushrooms in it? And if so, where? What index? So this whole thing now gets evaluated out to -1. So we're going up, right? We're going, all right, we put in the variables, now we execute index of, and now this whole thing is -1. Now we carry this up, and we go, does -1 not equal -1? -1 does equal -1, so this whole thing becomes false. Okay, if false, return true. No, we don't want to return true because this is false, so then we return false. So because we can take all of this, if we console log out, and we can do that, that might help. If we console log out this whole line right here, and change this back to mushrooms, and we can even comment out this stuff too. This whole thing evaluates out to false to the computer.
anything that is not equal to -1.
Exactly.
And because you can't find it, so it's probably.
So when you think about it as like, okay, put in the variables and then go to the next step of, okay, well, what does index of this and this equal? And it equals -1. So does -1 not equal -1? No, it does equal -1, so it's false. So that whole thing evaluates out to false, and that's what we want to return. So it's completely fine right now if you want to write it out as this. If this helps you get it, that's completely fine. But it is a little verbose, so it's a little cleaner to write it out just like this. But if you want to write it like that, it's also completely fine. Any questions? Okay, so we're gonna stop on here for arrays because now we get into loops, and that's tomorrow's topic. The good news is the next 30-ish minutes are gonna go a hell of a lot quicker because we're working with objects, and a lot of the functions of objects are very similar to arrays. So we are going to jump into key value pairs in JavaScript objects. So that's 2 exercises ahead. Okay, so they want foods to be an object. We know foods is an object because it's using curly braces. They want foods object to have a key of bananas, which is not in there at all. And it should have a value of 13. So what we do is we say foods dot bananas is equal to 13. And we run it, and we pass the one that we wanted it to. This can also be written as foods square bracket grapes is equal to 35. And foods dot strawberries is equal to 27. And we get it. So you can use dot notation or bracket notation. It's often preferred to use dot notation because it's a little bit easier to read, it's a little bit cleaner, and it's less characters. But if you prefer using bracket notation instead of dot notation, some companies will use one instead of the other. So completely up to what you guys want to do.
So the brackets are usually for arrays. In this case, we use it
For an object, that's correct.
why is that?
Because it's on the left side of the equal sign, it knows and it already knows that foods is defined as an object. So it's not looking for an array there because it knows foods is not an array. It knows foods is an object. So it goes, oh, okay, well, if you want to use a bracket instead, that's fine.
I'm lost.
You
Could you just explain what you just stated?
Sure. So in JavaScript, this is a legacy of JavaScript being created by one guy, literally in 2 weeks, which I will also post the history of JavaScript. There was literally one guy who founded what is now Firefox, and he created the whole JavaScript programming language in 2 weeks. Yes. And then he got to the end of it, and people started using it, and all the browsers started adopting it. And he went, oh my God, what monster did I create? Because once people started using it, he couldn't change it, right? It was, once people are using the code, if you change the language and the code no longer runs, people aren't going to use your language. So this was another artifact of that. So you can write, this bananas is called the key. And if we look up at foods, apples is a key, oranges is the key, and plums is a key in this object of foods.
So you're creating, it's not like a Java keyword, it's just you're creating your own keywords within
Yes.
the program.
Yep. It's not necessarily a keyword, it's just the key. Keyword it has a different meaning in JavaScript. That's the only reason why I throw it out there now. But 25, 32, and 28 are the three values of each one of these keys. And so what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, in this foods object, let's create a new key of bananas and make it equal to 13. And because JavaScript syntax is the way it is, we can do that either using the square brackets or the dot notation. And the reason why I point that out is because when you guys are reading other people's code or looking at open source software or whatever it may be, you will see this notation in addition to this notation. And so that's the reason why I point it out. So if we look at what the console is putting out, Free Code Camp again isn't being super helpful. It's just going, oh, it's an object. Well, could you tell us what the object is? And that's when we go into inspect and look in the console. We can see our apples, bananas, grapes, oranges, and they have, oh no, this is what we want. Our object has apples, bananas, grapes, oranges, plums, and strawberries. And you notice that just because I did grapes differently, the computer doesn't really care and it evaluates it out to the same thing either way. Yes. Yes, the value is 13, 35, or 27. So keys and values always go together. So strawberries is the key, and the value is 27.
Is that the same for the keywords?
Yes, the don't think of them as keywords, just think of them as keys.
Oh no, I'm saying JavaScript, like the library. Does do those like red like a variable, does it have their own value?
Yeah, so if you write out that's a bad example. So this is the value of my var is high, but this isn't a key because it's not in an object. So this is just a variable name. The reason why it's why we call apples, oranges, and plums keys is because it's the specific way you access their values in the object of foods.
Okay, so in an array, you wouldn't refer to the things contained in the array as keys?
No, those are values. The keys of those items would be 0, 1, 2.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's a great point. So arrays are keyed by the number, right? If it's the first thing in the item in the array, it would be a key of 0, right? The index of 0. Indexes are like keys in arrays. But in objects, the key, the way you access the data, is by a string, is by apples, oranges, and plums. And they have values of 25, 32, and 28. So what we're doing down here, and this will become more clear the further that we go, is we're just adding 3 new keys, bananas, grapes, and strawberries, and giving them some values.
Just out of curiosity,
Mhm.
the console log 25 is it gonna output an output?
If I console log, what do you want me to console log?
The value will it output the key? Or
We're going to hold that for a second because I believe that's the next challenge. Let's find out. Anyone have questions before I move on? Okay. So, no, they want us to modify. Let's take a quick look to see if they go through, because if not, I'll go back and answer that question. Modify access properties. Nope, that's coming up. Okay, so let's get rid of this. Now here's a more complex object. We have our object user activities, and we have the key ID with the crazy value. We have a date with a value of a string. We have a key of data, and in that value is another object. So this is what is called a nested object, right? It's an object in another object. And that object has two keys in it, total users of 51 and online of 42. So what we're going to do is they want user activity to have ID, date, and data. Properties and keys, by the way, are synonymous. They can be used interchangeably. User activity has a data key to set to an object with a key of total users and online. We already have that. The online property nested in data key of user activity should be set to 45. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, we want to modify user activity, and we want to go one level into that. So we want to go into data, and then we want to go into user activity, and we want to set that equal to 45. And if we go ahead and run that, the online property nested in the
It needs to be online for the third one, dot online.
Oh, thank you. Yep. So I wasn't nested deep enough, right? I set user activity, but user activity doesn't exist in this. Oh, they want it set.
A new property.
Gotcha.
No, take out the second user activity.
The online property nested in data key of user activity.
Yeah, so get rid of that user activity right there. Yeah.
Oh, and say.
Yeah. And then it works. Nope, then just do 45.
Why the hell do they? Oh.
They said it backwards.
Gotcha. Thank you. I appreciate that. I made that way too complicated. So this could also be written as user activity data online is equal to 45. And that will also run. Thank you for that. Like they want a new property? They're jumping. Okay. Good. Okay. Gonna move on. Now, what they want is the foods object should only have the data that it's already set. So they don't want us changing that. And what they want to be able to do is pass in what they want the data and return out the value of it. So if we return the foods, now I'm going to do it both ways here, and we're going to see what happens. Of scanned item and run it, we pass. But if I instead return foods of scanned item and run it, we fail. Why? Because when we say foods.scanned item, it's now looking for the key of scanned item in this list, and it can't find it. So what we were doing before was looked more like this. Return foods with the string value of scanned item. So we said, okay, now that this is in quotes, go look for the word scanned item. It's not in there. So we fail again. But when we don't include the quotes, we're not saying, hey, don't look for the word scanned item in the key. we're saying, hey, go look for whatever the value of scanned item is. And so when we run that, we pass. Apples gets passed in as a parameter of the scanned item. So apples, it's okay, totally happens. So that, but it's a good note, right? This parameter is essentially what is assigning the value to scanned item. So apples is getting passed in to the scanned item. So scanned item is now equal to apples. So we say, hey, return foods, and because this isn't in quotes, we say, hey, go look for foods, and the value of scanned item is apple. So go look for apple. Apple comes in, goes, that's 25. This whole thing, food scanned item, is now 25, and we return 25. And we cannot do this kind of function with dot notation, because dot notation always looks for that string, that scanned item. You can't say, hey, go look for the value of scanned item using that dot. So that's why there is a reason to use the brackets. Good? Okay.
Just out of curiosity.
Sure.
Why didn't you put console.log, they call the function and then give it a parameter? Why don't you just give the function a parameter? What would that?
It would still run. The console log is just to help you see what the function is outputting. So if we return foods. So
I keep doing that too.
I'm so used to hitting Command S that it's. So if I took out the console log on 17, and it still runs. It depends what you want to do with it. So when you're writing code, you want to obviously console log and see that it's coming out. But then as you know, now you want to do something with it. So it would be common to do something like const apple quantity is equal to check inventory, and then you would go write more code on the apple inventory.
And can you have the console log inside the function instead?
Yep. You can console log here. Console log, the computer is just like, hey man, if you want to know that, doesn't matter to me. So all of that still runs the same. Cool? All right. Okay, so we added a couple properties. Let's delete a couple properties. This one's a really hard keyword to remember. I think you guys can handle it though. Delete foods dot oranges, and we're gonna delete foods dot plums, and we're going to delete foods dot strawberries. Actually, I'm going to be a pain, and I'm going to use bracket notation because we can, and we're going to run that, and that's it. Delete is not like push. You do have to do each one on an individual line. If you did a comma here, that actually, let's find out. I could be wrong. Nope, that does not work. So you can't, you have to do each one on an individual line.
What if you did oranges and then comma?
So it doesn't know what plums is. So right now it would be looking for the variable plums, not the key of plums in the object of foods. So if we do that, it's gonna fail. Okay.
So on add, you can't use brackets.
You can. if we wanted to add foods and we wanted to add peaches, we can do that. And we can do foods.peaches is equal to 25, and we can, what we cannot do is foods peaches, because it's not a string. So it's going, what's peaches? Show me where peaches are, and if you tell me what peaches are, then I'll be able to do that.
Gotcha.
Question? Okay. All right, so we've added, we've removed. Now let's see, we did index of in the array to see if the array had it. Let's go through and see how we can check if an object has a property or a key, right? Property and keys are synonymous. Users can only contain this stuff. Is everyone here returns true if Alan, Jeff, Sarah, and Ryan are properties of users. If Alan, Jeff, Sarah, and Ryan are not in that object, we return false. So we're going to say if, and we're going to see has own property, right? So we're going to say if users dot has own property, and we're going to spell property right, and we're going to say Alan, and then we're going to use our fancy truth evaluators and say and user.has own property of Jeff, and we're going to keep going, and user.has own property. And notice I'm putting these in quotes because I'm not saying, oh, the variable of Sarah. I'm saying, no, I want the value of Sarah. I'm saying, you know, look for Sarah. I'm not saying look for a valuable, oh my God, a variable called Sarah. And we're going to do user.has own property of Ryan. And if all of those are true, we're going to return true, else we're going to return false. And it failed. Okay, let's see. So I should not be using user. I should be using object, because object is what's getting passed into the function. And that's what the function has access to. So if I actually change those out, I pass. So that's a good lesson is when you're writing a function, use the variable that's getting passed into you as opposed to a variable that's defined somewhere else. And just to hammer this home, we can do this, and this is completely fine. We can also copy this and do it without the if statement. And just say return so we can do either one here. And while you're typing this, don't fight the computer. So if you can look up at the screen while you're typing, if you start typing HAS, it's going to suggest has own property, and you can just hit enter and it's going to fill it in for you. And that's something that just takes time to get used to, but it's definitely worth learning how to type and look up at the screen, because the computer's like, oh, you want to program? I can help you program, and it's going to fill in things for you. And I will post all of these examples so you guys can go through them. Anyone stuck on that?
Just instead of having has own property and all the end statement, could you just combine all the names
into the, so let's look that up. Let's say JavaScript has own property, and we can look it up, and it only takes one parameter, right? The string name or symbol of the property to test. If this prop had square brackets around it, that's documentation speak for that it takes multiple. But because it doesn't, according to the documentation, it won't work. Now, of course, the other way to find out is to just do it. And let's just do it on Jeff. And we'll take that one out. And run it. Oh! How about that? So that is what we call bad documentation, because let's see if I just found. Oh. Good to know. See? Learn something new every day. Okay, gonna move on. And that's it. That's all we're gonna do. Sure can. Oh. It wiped out my code, so I'm just retyping it quickly.
You just put all 4 in there.
Yep. So that is what we call refactoring. Hey, it's great and it runs and you did your if-else statement, but that's pretty long. You can get rid of the if-else and you can just do the return. And you go, great. And then someone else comes along and goes, that's wordy code. You don't need to call has own property 4 times. You can just list it all out as that. It's like, oh, I don't know that. And so you refactor it and that's how your code gets better.
Okay, so you don't need anything else?
Nope. So, you guys made it. I'm exhausted. I'm guessing you guys are exhausted. Nope. And get rid of the if and make it a return. Okay. Oh, you see that red line under the last parenthesis there? That's your computer telling you, trying to help you out. All right, so I'm done teaching. I'm exhausted. Yes. Question. Oh, okay. The homework is posted. It is a bunch of doing what we just did. There may be a lot of it. So I'm not expecting you guys to get through every one of them, but it is listed out in the Google Classroom. If you guys just go through the exercises and then when you're done, do you know how to take a screenshot on your Mac? Okay. So do a screenshot on the Mac and upload that to the Google Classroom. And that will be your homework. You're not expected to do every single one of them, but based off of what we just went over, you should be able to do each one. If you guys want to pair program, that's completely fine. I'm obviously going to be here for another half hour, just helping you guys get through the exercises. If you want to work on them yourself, that's completely fine. While I think pair programming is great, these exercises I think are a little bit better to do on your own and then go, why isn't this one in particular working, as opposed to someone else coding over your shoulder. While we progress and start working on more advanced things, we will start shifting into more encouraged pair programming. All the exercises are on Free Code Camp. And they're under, I'm sorry, I forgot, I will update the post. They're all under, basic JavaScript, I think. Yeah, they're all under basic JavaScript. Let me update that now, and I'm going to stop the stream.